Barriers to effective communication. By now, you are familiar with that communication is. You will recollect that in the earlier part of this unit, communication has been defined as the transmission of meaning or understanding. Yet, by far, most of the communication in organization or between person fails to satisfy this criterion. Communication quite often fails to convey the meaning or develop an understanding of the communication sufficient enough to bring about a change in behavior of the recipient. According to Peter Drucker, we have more attempts at communication today. This that is more attempts to talk to others and a surfeit of communication media, yet communication has proved as elusive as a unicorn. The noise level has gone up so fast that no one can really listen anymore to all that bubble about communications. But clearly, there is less and less of communicating. The communication gap between institutions and between groups is in society that has been widening steadily to the point where it threatened to become a unbring, unbridgeable gulf of total misunderstanding. Management tasks, responsibilities, and practices P481. One of the biggest danger in communication is to assure that communication has taken place. Most of us indeed make a great effort in formulating ideas and finding appropriate words and communicating them to other. In organization too, much money and energy is used to develop it system and communication, and yet if you try to assess how far the system has led the effective communication in terms of the desired responsible, you will be surprised at the result. There is a 50-50 chance of the communication not being understood to the degree you would be satisfied with. This has been proved that by a number of experiments and observations made by communications specialists. There is a story from the army which tells of an instruction starting at one end of the line as send reinforcement and ending up at the other end of the line as send 3 shillings and 6 pences. You can perhaps test it yourself. Try to recollect the news items of the previous evening news telecast on, or broadcast. How many items can you recollect? Most likely less than half. These examples indicate what happens to the most of the communications between persons or within organizations. It is not only important that a communication be sent, it is much more important that it be understood. When an understanding of the communication does not take place, we can hardly expect a desired change in the behavior of the receiver. What causes a failure of communication? The failure in communication arises because of certain blockages or barriers between the sender and the receiver. In order to make a communication effective, it must be ensured that these barriers are removed. What are the commercial media main these days try to achieve is to overcome the barriers and reach the large audience. What kind of barriers interfere with the effectiveness of communication? In the paragraph that follow, we shall discuss the various reasons which either prevent the communication from reaching the receiver or in distort it in such a manner that it ends up either as non-communication or as miscommunication. Since a manager has to use communication as a mean of getting the work done through his subordinates, he must ensure that barriers are minimized and effective communication takes place. The barriers that interfere with the understanding of the communication are of three kinds: semantic, psychological, and organizational. We shall discuss them one by one. Semantic barriers. Most of the difficulties in communication arise because of the same word or symbol means different things to different individuals. Perhaps you remember what happened to Shini Abraham at the recent 1986 Asian Games at Seoul. Despite coming first by the very wide margin in the 800-meter race, she was disqualified and lost her gold medal for having crossed the track at the place where she should not have done. According to her, the mistook the symbol, that is the color of the flag, whereas in our country the red flag indicates danger. In South Korea, white flag is used for the same purpose. Misunderstood Misinterpreting the white flag which had been put up at that point, she crossed the track at the wrong place and suffers a setback. Words which are in reality symbol representing a thing, an action, or a feeling can have several meaning as explaining earlier. Words which represents concentrate things, example car or house, tend to the understood in the same way, while abstract words like merit, effectiveness, or responsibility tend to the interpreted by different person in different ways. Difficulty in misunderstanding may arise when, in the case of ordinary words which have different contextual meanings, lately such difficulties are being experienced increasingly by people working in international development field. One such problems arose in interpreting the meaning of the word step in a training program of health workers relating to the family health in Jamaica. When a question, what are some of the steps that a mother should take to make sure that her baby keeps healthy, was asked, it was found that there was no response to it. The trainees who were accustomed to only one meaning of the word step based on their experience could not just take any sense of the question. Semantic difficulty may arise because of unfamiliarity with words. For example, a word of some foreign language of which the receiver has no knowledge. A technical word may also create such a problem, it may be beyond the ability of the receiver to understand it. In order to make it effective, a communication must be put into words which are appropriate to the environment and mental framework of the receiver. This ensures the communication to be grasped properly and implemented effectively. A very interesting example of a communication made effective by the use of words appropriate to the environment in which they were used in provided by the following incident took place in one of the agricultural states of the USA. A proposal for raising the salaries of the faculty members of an agricultural college was under discussion. The former bloc was totally against giving the raise to the college teachers. They could not see why they should pay those college teachers $5,000 a year for talking 12 or 15 hours a week. Faculty representatives made no headway in their negotiations until one of them who had some farming experience got an inspiration. Gentlemen, he hold the member of the administrative body. A college teacher is a little like a bull. It's not the amount of time he spends, it's the importance of what he does. The faculty members got the raise. Semantic barriers may further be created by body language that are inconsistent with the verbal communication. A manager who praised the honesty and sincerity of his subordinate in the sarcastic tone creates doubts in the minds of the subordinates as to the course of action he should adopt in a given situation in future. The same kind of barrier is created by a divergence between the verbal language and the action language of the superior. When action and language are used jointly, the action often have more powerful influence on others' action than do words. A management may, for example, profess its belief in being guided solely by the merit of employees while making promotions. Yet, if employees observes that in actual practice promotions are made on consideration other than merit, the management's professed policy is bounded to be affected by semantic barriers. It is not likely to communicate anything. Only the actions will communicate, and what they communicate will be contrary to what had been said it in so many words. Psychological barriers. Psychological barriers are the prime barriers in interpersonal communication. The meaning that is ascribed to a message depend upon the emotional or psychological status of both the parties concerned. As such, the psychological barriers may be set up either by the receiver or the sender of the message. You have already seen that the effectiveness of any communication depends upon the perception of the right meaning of the message on the part of the receiver. However, the perception of meaning is only much affected by the mental frame of the receiver all the time the message is received. Emotion which dominates our mood at the time, example anger, anxiety, fear, happiness, etc., will affect our interpretation of the message. The phrases viewing with colored glasses or seeing with jaundiced eyes explain vividly how our inner feelings may vitiate our perception of message or the situation. Past experience of the receiver in such situations would also lead to the same effect. The same thing may happen when different individuals interpret the same event or situation. For example, take the case of a supervisor watching a group of employees resting and gossiping on the lawns. how will this situation be perceived? To the supervisor who believes that employees are basically lazy, the situation communication communicates to him that they are playing truant with their work and therefore should be given more work to do and disciplined. To the superior who believes that his workers are self motivated and are sincere workers, the situation communicates that they are enjoying a well earned rest. To the superior's supervisor who is personally insecure, the situations communicate that they are conspiring against him. You will therefore see that a particular kind of situations, event happening or words and symbols are capable of being interpreted by different people in different ways according to their own psychological states. A receiver who is suspicious or hostile, either as a consequence of his feeling of insecurity or because of his past experience with the sender of the communication, is most likely to start reading between the lines and ascribe a distorted meaning to the message. To the receiver's mind, a communication gets tied up with the personality of source. This is what some people call the halo effect. Thus, if we receive a message from a person we admire, we are more likely to agree with it and act accordingly. On the other hand, our immediate reaction will be one or disagreement with a message that has been received from a person we do not like or trust. Thus our perception of meaning of the communication is colored by our own value judgment about the source of the communication. A receiver of the communication suffers from another problem which psychologists refers to as cognitive dissonance, since an individual tend to be fed with too much of information from different sources, which is commonly the case in an organizational setting. He becomes selective in receiving and responding to the communications. He is most likely to hear only those messages that conforms to his own belief, attitudes and judgment. How communication that conflict with his own viewpoint tend to be ignored. Often the other point of view may not only be ignored, it would indeed be regarded as unfriendly or even hostile. If this happens frequently, subordinates may start questioning whether their superior really wants to hear the bad news that is often contrary to his own. As a consequence, much of the unfavorable news in an organization would never get reported to higher level until the problem has assumed to assumed the form of a crisis. One common phenomenon with all communication is the effect of filtering. This effect is produced when the communication passes through a large number of persons. Each individual through whom the information is passed interprets fact differently, judges from his own point of view that what is important or relevant, and passes it on its with his own interpretation, with the result that the original communication gets altered in the process of filtering involves a biased choice of what is communicated on the part of either the sender or the receiver. Thus, filtering refers to the process of selecting, telling, or selective listening. For example, a subordinate may tell the boss what the boss wants to hear. Similarly, through several factors affecting productivity in the organization may have been identified by the staff, yet the manager may hear and respond only to those factors that fit his convenienced preconceived view of the situation. In either case, selectively is introduced in the process of communication, leading to a distortion in communication. Organizations are particularly prone to the effect of filtering. In large organizations where there are several levels of through which a communication must pass, filtering takes place at each level. In order to save the time of the busy executive and to save him from information overload, it is common in organizations for subordinates to prepare note or abstract of the communication before passing it on the supervisor. The higher information has to travel, the higher is the degree of abstraction, with the possibility that significant piece of information may be entirely missed on their significance, diluted or distorted. The largely the number of filtering points in an organization, the greater is the chances of distortion. This may happen when outside an organization, when communication is passed on verbally from one to another, as in a grapevine. Organizational barriers. Organizations provide a formal framework through which communication is designed to flow. The structuring of the flow itself tend to act as a barrier against free flow of communication between persons and level in the organizations. Rules may prescribe how communication are to move from one level to another in upwards or downwards directions. Not only is there a possibility of delays in the communication reaching its destination, but also there is every possibility of communication getting distorted through the process of filtering described in the previous paragraph. It has been found that when channeled information is channeled through different level of organization, it becomes altered as people interpreted fact differently. It in an organizational setting, this can be very big problem since senior level executives who work through other have to depend more and more on the information and interpretation of their subordinates. Critical information that has lost its criticality because of the action of the intervening level may jeopardize the position of the manager as well as the organization itself. It has been observed that the upward communication is particularly subject to the influence of filtering in large organizations. Upward communication serves essentially two purposes in an organization. First, it helps in coordinating and controlling the activities of the organization. Second, It enables the superior to appraise the performance of his subordinates. While the former does not create any problems, the latter has behavioral incomplication, implement, behavioral implications. It is human nature to show one's performance in a better light than what is actually is. This tendency of an individual naturally brings about a filtering through conscious or unconscious altering, withholding or interpreting facts to be transmitted upwards. Dependency syndrome of the subordinate heightens the tendency to filter information in a superior subordinate relationship. The subordinate is generally speaking dependent on the superior for his advancement. Studies show that the greater the dependency of the subordinate on his superior for the satisfaction of his needs, the more his dependent tendency to filter information of an unfavorable kind. It has been found that subordinates are generally unwilling to communicate unfavorable information when they feel that their superior has the power to punish them in some way. Only positive aspects of performance are likely to be communicated upwards. Another barriers in another barriers in organizational setting is created by the superior subordinate relationship between which develop a distance between the two. People are more comfortable in communicating with persons of similar status on their own. Communication with persons of higher or lower status is likely to be formal and reticent rather than informal and free. The distance between the superior and subordinates and the difficulty in freer communication between them tends to be highlighted through status symbol which might be used to show the hierarchical status of the person concerned. Status symbols within an organization may be in the form of separate parking space, separate bathrooms, separate refreshment rooms, cabinet with stylish furniture, carpets, etc. Such symbols accentuate the distance between the different hierarchical level and tend to widen the communication gap. Perhaps you may have read the among the several characteristics of Japanese style of management is the removal of status symbol. For example, under the Japanese system, there are no separate cabins for managers, uniforms for workers and managers are the same. They eat the same menu in the same cafeteria. All these are intended to reduce the distance between the workers and the managers and bring about a better understanding of the problems of the organization, which is the chief objective of organizational communication. You have read in the last few pages about the problems and crop up in communicating with others. Whether inside or outside the organization, these problems create an interference in the process of sharing of the meaning of a communication and thus block its effectiveness. As a manager, you will be continuously required to make use of your communication abilities in the performance of your job. Since your success as a manager will be judged in terms of the result that you produce, the effectiveness of your communication is therefore of prime importance to you. We shall explain to you in a few perhaps below what you can do to make your communications effective.